good evening, and welcome to this most intriguing talk, King's talk on hearing about the UK's newest university, the London Interdisciplinary School, the first given degree-given awarding powers in over 50 years. Will open its doors to students in September 2021. I'm Greg Hunter and I'm the Deputy Head Co-Curricular at King's. Tonight, we welcome back Louise Augustine-Aina after leaving Harvey House 7 years ago. And we're also privileged to welcome and joined by Professor Carl Gombrich, the co-founder and Director of Teaching and Learning at the London Interdisciplinary School. After the interview and the presentation, we will be taking questions from you, the audience. Please either type your question into the Q&A function as part of Zoom at any time, or alternatively, and encouraged to be honest, put your virtual hand up after the presentation, and we can put you on the air live to ask the question yourself. To start with tonight, I'm going to ask Louise just a few questions. So Louise, firstly, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Greg. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone.
That's great. Now, so please, can we just start? Can you tell me your memories of King's?
Sorry, you just cut out there, Greg.
Oh, that's okay. Sorry, Louise. Can you just tell us your memories of King's?
Okay. Okay, I'd say some of my best memories at King's probably have to be all in Harvey House. I've made lifelong friends being at King's. Some of them are on the call now. Hi, guys. And yeah, I mean, and I can't talk about Harvey House without talking about my house mistress at the time, who was Mrs. Coxworth. She was absolutely amazing. To know her was to love her. And I just have such fond memories of her. I feel like we had like a special bond. And then when we all left, she gave us all like books that had to do with all the subjects that we were studying, and a trinket, like a heart trinket, and I still keep that hung up in my room till this day. So yeah, definitely Mrs. Coxworth and just like all my friends that I made whilst I was at Harvey, probably my top memory. I can't like pick out one. It was just an amazing time. So yeah.
That's absolutely wonderful. And tell me about your journey. So you left King's, what happened next?
So, oh gosh, that's quite a big question. Lots happened in the last 7 years. But so I left King's, and I think whilst I was at King's, just in terms of my when I was thinking about university and things like that, I just didn't know what to study. I just refused to study one subject. That was something that just didn't feel natural to me, like at all. So everything, I applied for joint honours degrees in everything. So I remember I applied for law and anthropology, law and politics, and I ended up going on to study law and politics at Queen Mary. And when I got there, I was just like, I really didn't enjoy it. I remember thinking it was going to be this course, it was just this interesting mix of law and politics, and I got there and realized it was law on one side and the law department was in one place and the politics part was another place, and there was absolutely no overlap, and I just remember absolutely hating it. So then I left, I worked for a year. And then I decided to go back to university, and I studied politics, philosophy and economics at New College of the Humanities, which is, I feel like, kind of put the bug in my ear, and got me thinking about, new universities within the higher education space. And that's kind of how I found out about LIS, which is where I work now. So it's the London Interdisciplinary School. I'm the student engagement officer here, and I think being at NCH, like I said, was kind of started, it was the inception of just like thinking about what are the other options out there. And just also doing an interdisciplinary course myself, in a way, doing PPE as well. So that was kind of like it was almost like a natural, I won't say journey. It always kind of came quite naturally to me to kind of move on and be at LIS now. So right now what I'm doing is we open our doors, as you said, in September 2021. It's my job to find the 100 students that are going to be who are going to start LIS next September, and it's just really exciting. And I just think it's an amazing opportunity. It's something that I would have loved to have had the opportunity to do when I was at King's, as someone who, like I said, didn't want to study one subject. So our students are going to be kind of, studying across the disciplines and graduate with a BASC degree, so a Bachelor of the Arts and Sciences, which I think is awesome. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing now, and kind of a shortened version of what I've been doing over the last 7 years, I guess. But yeah.
Sounds absolutely exciting and very thought-provoking, and I'm looking forward to hearing more tonight. So really, I think it's an opportune time now to pass over to yourself and Professor Karl to continue with this talk, and I'll see you later on in the talk.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm just going to hand over to Karl, and he's we're in for a treat today, so thank you, Karl, for even being here. He's a very busy man, I'll say that, so it's great that he's able to join us today. So yeah.
Thank you, Louise. It's great to hear your journey and to hear your thoughts about interdisciplinarity and the connections between subjects. So thank you everyone also for joining us this evening. I know Zoom fatigue is a thing these days, so I'll try to make it enlivened and get the blood flowing as William Harvey was doing all those years ago, or at least observing. I've been told that colour purple is significant in King's, so I'm glad that my camera is slightly malfunctioning because I look much more purple than I actually am. So I hope that's appropriate tonight as well, and I hope you can see me. But I'm just going to pull up on my screen my presentation, and hopefully you'll be able to see this in a few seconds. Is that visible now, Louise? Are we okay? Just give me a hand signal on that. Great, I'll just try and get presentation mode. Thank you. So I'm going to speak for 25 minutes or so and hopefully leave plenty of time for questions. And I want to make a strong case, because I'm passionate about this, that our education system is incredibly stuck in the past in a way that very few other parts of society really are. One of the reasons it's stuck is we're not able to think about this thing called interdisciplinarity in a more mature and contemporary way. So I want to make a case that your future is much more interdisciplinary than perhaps you realize, and to really sort of ask you to think about your future in some of the ways Louise has been saying, and of course I'll build on that as well, as to what sort of education is the best for your future and why that might be. I'm aware that some of you may never have heard of this term at all, and some of you will be very familiar. So I think it's worth taking a moment to just recap a sort of common definition of interdisciplinarity. It's the study or research which combines the methods and knowledge of two or more existing disciplines in order to create a synthesis which would not have been possible using only one of the disciplines. And I'd like to take you through this talk in the next 25 minutes or so to put your mind at rest about some things like breadth versus depth, and whether this is kind of going to help you get a job, and all sorts of worries that actually come out of our very antiquated way about thinking what meaningful study is and what progression in learning and study is. And I want to try to show you many ways in which interdisciplinarity is a way to get more depth and more expertise, which is more aligned with the modern world. So we live in this amazing period in which my background, by the way, is in maths and physics, my degrees, and I did a philosophy degree along the way, and I was also a professional opera singer for a while. So I'm interested in lots of different things. And in my 40s, really, this amazing opportunity came up at UCL, where I set up the first Bachelor of Arts and Sciences in the UK, the first BASc in the UK. And it was an amazing experience for me because I was able to combine all my many varied interests from literature and languages and music right through to hard sciences. And what's the case, really, what's clearly true and what really hits me every day as someone now in the middle of my life is that we literally walk through the electromagnetic waves which are combining knowledge and ideas and creativity and innovation in a way never imagined in history before. If you were a sort of being that could capture the electromagnetic waves, which are the things which transfer information on the internet, you'd be in a kind of, well, it would be overwhelming for a start, but you'd have this extraordinary ability to put together ideas which never existed in history before. So I call this an explosion in the combinatorial space of ideas. And it's well known from studies in innovation, in engineering, in business, and so on, that it is in combining new ideas and ways of thinking and working that innovation really happens. And so this is the opportunity, really. This is the promise, which we should be thinking about in education, and yet we're doing almost the opposite. We're so scared of this new world that we're sticking to narrower and narrower syllabi, narrower and narrower ideas of study and expertise, which come out of the past but are no longer fit for the present. And unsurprisingly, there's been a relative explosion in books about this sort of thing. So a book called The Polymath by a member of my team at the New London Interdisciplinary School traces polymathy through history and all sorts of different cultures as well, very interestingly, and shows that at certain points in history, the European Renaissance being one that we're more familiar with, this idea of the polymath, of being able to draw on lots of different areas in order to do fantastically innovative and creative intellectual and practical work, bubbles up as something that's kind of necessary and of its time. And we're living through a new Renaissance. Many people have commented on this. The philosopher of art, John Forester, was talking about this in the 1980s. But it's becoming more and more apparent that people who are able to take these opportunities are the people who are going to push our society forward in its thinking. We have a whole range of books here, from people talking about neo-generalism, breadth of knowledge rather than narrow knowledge, books on careers, how to have many different portfolio careers. A lovely story which a friend of mine, Kate Rayworth, the economist, tells me she was once approached. She's a typical Oxford product, PPE and a master's degree in economics, all distinctions all the way through, but she decided not to do a PhD because she thought it was too narrowing. And someone came up at some event and said, "Oh, you're one of these typical high achievers, aren't you?" And she thought for a moment. She said, "No, actually, I'm more of a wide achiever than a high achiever." And you may or may not know her work, Donut Economics. You can check it out, but she wrote a very big bestseller 4 or 5 years ago now, did a TED talk with, I think, 3.5 million views now, about how economics needs reform. And she drew on all her different areas of life, from psychology, politics, history, and so on, in order to refertilize economics and provide a new kind of way of thinking economically. So for her, the wideness was a way of giving a new type of expertise, which was richer and more innovative than her previous economic education. So looking back through history, forgive me, I've been a bit trendy here. I've deliberately chosen 2 guys who look honestly fairly pale, male, and stale. But these were great figures of their time. And don't get me wrong, the guy on the left was William Whewell, who actually coined the phrase scientist. And he was interesting because he saw this fragmentation of knowledge into narrower and narrower silos, as we call them, and he wanted to kind of bring it together under one new umbrella he called the scientist. The guy on the right, F.R. Leavis, a rather different character, famous for being very kind of spiky in the so-called 2 cultures debate in the 1950s, where another Cambridge academic lamented that in British society, you either did sciences or did the arts, and how detrimental this was to British innovation and culture and so on. And Leavis here on the right fought back very strongly for just the humanities and said that we needed to have a special place for English literature in that. I mean, it's worth pointing out all these things we think are kind of, serious established creeds were all totally innovative, revolutionary, and actually, frankly, regarded as downright silly at some points. So English literature, I think, was invented sometime between the late 19th and early 20th centuries as a degree. And one eminent academic commented, "Why do I need a degree for books I read on the way to work anyway?" So all these things that we think are kind of set in stone in history are very much not set in stone. And I'm going to make the case increasingly that we need to rethink some of these. So if you look back, I mentioned the Renaissance as a period where people did a lot more in terms of breadth across the arts and sciences. And this started to change in the 17th century in Europe, when science, as we know it now, really started to rise. And people started gradually to specialize in things they came to call physics, chemistry, and biology, and so on. And very interestingly, parallel to this, you had what's called the industrialist mindset and specialization of working. So Adam Smith, can you all still hear me? I'm hearing some scary beeps as if I'm not coming across. I hope it's okay. I've got my phone on too in case anyone tells me I'm not.
It's fine, Carl. It's
okay.
absolutely fine.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for the intervention. We had Adam Smith talking about, if you specialized on making pins and somebody made the head and somebody made the body and somebody tapped it all together, you have a more efficient output. And then through the 19th and 20th century, through the sort of industrial processes and what, of course, with Henry Ford, with his first conveyor belt making cars, and then Taylorism in factories, became to see division of labor and increasing specialization as a kind of mark of expertise. That's how you got really good. You just did one thing. But what, of course, is remarkable about the modern world is that all that industrial stuff is now being taken over by robots and AI. And there's a whole literature, which I could another talk about, which is now saying the thing that humans must do is not do anything which requires such narrow specialization that you can automate it. Once you have rules for something, any kind of rules, you can put that in an algorithm in a computer and the computer can do it. So what's really important for humans now is to have what's literally called general intelligence, be able to draw from different areas, see things from different perspectives, be very adaptable in different environments. And that's a completely different way of thinking about your education and your training from this increasing narrow specialism, which broadly started in Europe around the 1600s and lasted into the end of the last century. So interestingly, historically, people were becoming aware of this tension even early in the last century. So by 1926, when the word interdisciplinarity was coined, scientists were worried about how specialized people were coming, how hyper-specialized, as it's called, and unaware of what each other were doing, unable to make connections across the existing disciplines. And this has become increasingly acute throughout the last century. And now, due to the things I've talked about, the rise of robots and automation, and this positive thing that we have the opportunity now to connect across ideas and disciplines in a way we simply didn't have 20, 30 years ago. So how does this work for you if you're thinking about what you do after graduation? Well, one thing I want to kind of assuage your worries about, reassure you about, is that a traditional academic discipline has almost nothing to do with whether you'll get a good job or not. So this is the latest research from the main research organization in the UK that looks at graduate employment, the Institute of Student Employers, from last year. And this was published in the paper a few months ago, this report. And they say UK employers do not recruit by degree discipline. Our annual student recruitment survey showed that 86% of employers do not care, note the rather strong and casual way they say that, do not care what a student studied. Now that is a staggering statistic. 9 out of 10 of the graduate recruiters you will go to after university don't care whether you did biochemistry, history, mathematics, or indeed a liberal arts or an interdisciplinary degree. So the connection between single honors study and getting a job afterwards, even to the extent of you think you might need economics to go and work in the bank, absolutely not, irrelevant. That connection is completely broken. And so we need to kind of ask why, what's going on, and why do we insist on these old-fashioned categories when they are at best irrelevant, frankly, and at worst not very helpful. Just some more data on that to back up the story. This outfit was previously called the Association of Graduate Recruiters, and this was a previous slide I used from the 2016 survey, 194 employers. The statistic then was 82%. When you look back in the thousands, it was 63% of graduate employers didn't care what discipline you'd studied. So this is an increasing trend, which matches very well the idea that we're in some kind of new renaissance, that this combinatorial space of ideas is giving us all sorts of opportunities, combine things that we need to do. And employers know that because they have to get the right people working for them. But universities and school subjects aren't able yet to kind of think in this way and meet these kind of requirements. Well, when you think about the sorts of jobs that people are actually doing after university, whether that's in gaming, which requires a mixture of psychology, coding, graphic design, narrative, English literature is useful for gaming, believe it or not. Neuroscience, which combines with almost everything these days. You can do very interesting things on neuroscience and law, from literally discussing whether people are guilty because of the structure of their brains to thinking about how juries operate in the collective psychology. Neuroscience and film, filmmakers thinking about how neuroscience impacts on the films they make. Data is in everything now. Data visualization, which is of course a combination of data science, but also graphic design, psychology, sustainability. All these things are actually the contemporary jobs. And yet very few of them really correspond to traditional academic subjects. Yes, in some cases you'll get certain courses in these things, and that's great. But the real message of this is that all these require new and novel combinations of existing ways of working and seeing the world, with which really most educational institutions aren't keeping up. So you might see the word hybrid popping up in many job applications these days. There's a big data company called Burning Glass Technologies who look at billions of job postings throughout the world. And their 2019 report shows the rise of the word hybrid in the sorts of people they're looking for. because jobs are becoming more hybrid, more complex. What does that mean? It means that jobs require everyone in them to combine some elements of science, whether that's, say, data science or computer science, with graphic design, or even with soft skills, with team building, team leading, and so on. And the way that you can get that would have to be by combining traditional subjects. And it's not just in computer science, of course. A lot of the biological sciences also now cross over into very different areas. So on my last degree I ran at UCL, we had people doing genetics and law because of the whole area of bioethics growing up, and genomic counseling, advising parents on various genetic screening tests and so on. These require hybrid skill sets which radically combine a scientific knowledge and some kind of legal and philosophical understanding and frameworks. And just one more on this. This is a very wordy slide, and I've got some less wordy slides. Got this a few months ago, early 2020. Hey, Carl, hope you're well. Just thought you'd like to know I'm currently producing a podcast for my company called Insurance Tomorrow. Doesn't sound very exciting, right? But this Insurance Tomorrow looks at global business trends like Brexit or the rise of autonomous cars and how it will impact the insurance industry. I'm working on an episode about data science, smart cities, the Internet of Things, and I thought you'd be very happy to hear that I find myself using the word interdisciplinarity a lot in my conversations, feeling very grateful for my interdisciplinary. Of course, that's absolutely lovely to me. I do get quite emotional still when I read these statements, because these students took a bit of a risk. They took a bit of a gamble. They were brave enough to see what they needed to learn and why they needed to do it. And these guys jumped out to UCL to study on the BASc there. And similarly, at my new university, brand new university, which exists because we think these changes are well overdue and we have an opportunity to build a whole institution around queer thinking, our new students will also have to be brave. But this previous experience at UCL gives me immense confidence that our new graduates will be fantastically placed to do all sorts of interesting things. And even, like this quote shows, to make things like insurance actually quite fascinating. When you think that you need to understand insurance, think about smart cities, data, the Internet of Things, and all sorts of things like that. So it's wonderful for any teacher. All your teachers will tell you this. And Louise was speaking very beautifully about it earlier. The greatest feedback for a teacher is when a student comes back and says, thank you for what you did. So nice to get these messages. And I'll refer to a couple of students later on as well. So why particularly interdisciplinarity now? Well, I've mentioned this in different ways already, so I won't spend too long on this slide. But one is we have these complex, so-called complex real-world problems we're all wrestling with. Climate change, sustainability, migration, artificial intelligence, and ethics, and so on and so on. And they all cross subject boundaries. They all require multiple disciplines in order to tackle them. And the second point is internet-enabled learning. I talked a little bit about this when I mentioned the explosion of combinatorial space of ideas, but just closer to home, I'm sure many of you in this room who are interested in learning don't just look at your school books. You'll jump around. You'll look at a YouTube video. You might read something someone sent you. Maybe even you'll look at some academic articles occasionally, at least parts of them. And you must be thinking sometimes, what subject is this? And why am I confined to only one subject when I'm making these connections across the subjects? So these two strong pressures together, both the kind of needs of society, if you like, and the kind of what's happening anyway from the way people are learning, are creating a new world in which interdisciplinarity is kind of welcomed and which is challenging traditional subject boundaries. So here are some of the real world problems. I've mentioned them already. Climate change, free speech, which is a combination, if you like, of law, ethics, but also, of course, now media studies, algorithms, and so on, games, mental health. And one of my favorites is money and currency, because economists have very little to say about money and currency. It's one of the last things you study on an economics degree. And yet it kind of dominates really everything. So what is money? I often ask a group of students when I have the pleasure of talking to you in real life. And we think about that, and great answers I've had. It's crystallized trust in a society. So what is that? Is that psychology? Is that anthropology? So how would we get new currency systems? And of course, blockchain is challenging this too. Is that computer science? Is that trust? Got very little to do with contemporary economics, I can tell you that. But all these kind of complex problems require this interdisciplinary mindset. So I'm going to move on towards the end of my talk now. And I said I would try to assuage some worries about getting a job. I hope I've done that. Now I'm going to try and assuage some more worries, which to me are more interesting, about the kind of notion of expertise and what is valuable to study. And I want us to think about this idea of a searchlight as a metaphor for modern expertise, for interdisciplinary expertise. The idea is simply that you have an area of study which you're interested in. I'm going to choose one real world example, which I'll come back to in a couple of slides. I have a student now doing a PhD at Oxford in civil engineering, very technical, you know, she's got to be good at the quantitative stuff. But she looks at the flooding of small island states due to climate change. So that's a very kind of niche thing that she's interested in. That's the golden ball you see here. That's her object of study, climate change affecting flooding of small island states. And she looks at that from very different disciplinary perspectives. She has the civil engineering chops, she does a lot of modeling, but she also has sociological lenses, anthropological lenses, and in the past she used even legal lenses and economic lenses to look at how to implement engineering projects so that they actually work and are sustainable. The world is littered with engineering projects devised by engineers with no concept of how to implement that engineering infrastructure in a society. Will the people use it? Will they maintain it? Will the politicians allow it? Is it affordable? And because she has this, and this is the key phrase really, she's an interdisciplinary expert. She's an expert because of her interdisciplinary way of working, not in spite of it. So the idea that you're sort of constantly struggling to do enough of one thing and enough of another to be really expert, because we're so stuck in this idea that you have to do more of one same subject, is kind of the wrong way around. You need to flip it on its head. So what am I interested in? I heard an example of this yesterday. Somebody was interested in identity. Fascinating, incredibly important modern subject and idea. But what is that? Well, it's partly psychology, she was saying. It's partly politics. It's partly sociology. It's partly biology. And the only way that person can be an expert in identity, there's her golden orb, if you like, is to shine all these different lenses on it. So she's an expert in identity because of her interdisciplinary approach, not in spite of it, just as my student is in her particular branch of civil engineering. So there you are, there's the searchlight metaphor. I couldn't get a perfect one where it was illuminated from all angles, but you get the idea. You get the 360 in the round, complete vision of the object of study that you're interested in by looking at it from different disciplinary lenses and creating this synthesis, back to our first definition, which is greater than the sum of the parts. So there's Lena, my student at Oxford. This is wonderful. I have to share this with you because just a week or so ago, she won a major international prize from the Allianz organization in Germany, and several thousand euros, which is going to go very nicely towards her cycling budget. And if you just look down at the bottom here, it says she developed a novel systems approach that for the first time spatially assesses impacts of hazards across a nation's entire built and national assets, including energy, healthcare, and ecosystems. So they were very impressed with this interdisciplinary approach and the fact that she's able to bring there all these different lenses on the topic, and that's why she won the prize. Just a few more examples. I hope I've made this case actually, so I won't go labor this. These are all students of mine from UCL now doing PhDs or having completed PhDs. So again, that's a mark of expertise, right? Because we say a PhD is the proper idea of an expert if you've got a doctorate in something. These are all interdisciplinary PhDs, where their expertise is because of interdisciplinary, not in spite of it. So one student at UCL with a background in architecture, but also mathematics and psychology, look at the effect of the built environment on our brain and well-being. I've mentioned, I haven't put Lena on here actually. So you can just have a think about those different categories. They're all interdisciplinary ways of being an expert. So really, I'm coming to a close now, last two slides. I think this is the excitement, this is the opportunity. We need to think about learning, as we do so much of the modern world, as a network of connected ideas in our mind. And that network really can be as broad and as rich and as different as you want it to be, as long as it does connect and creates a coherent whole, like Lena does with her law, engineering, economics, sociology. And we need to stop thinking of education as going as the narrow track, and you go, quote, deeper and deeper into one thing. This is challenging. This is for people who love learning and who are brave. Like I say, you don't have to be too brave, because to be honest, you're going to get a great job at the end of it anyway, because it doesn't matter what you study. That's all the data shows. But you've got to be kind of psychologically and educationally brave, if you like. You know what? I'm going to jump out from this tired old thinking of the combined honours that Louise mentioned, which don't even bother to connect with each other. And I'm going to try and think about what I'm interested in, and how those things connect. And this is the modern way of viewing the world in everything from transport systems to social networks. We think of things and connections between them, relationships. And yet if you think about that metaphor and you look about how much your education system thinks about your learning as a network, which is of value to you, you'll find it very hard to find a lot of writing on that. And this is what I mean, it's so surprising to me, almost tragic and very ironic, that education is like the last thing to think about networks of interdisciplinary knowledge. The last kind of area where we're talking about networks regularly is education. So this is an amazing period, I think, in history where you can build these fascinating interdisciplinary networks of knowledge in your own mind and find practical application of them, but it's still very rare. And that's why we needed to start a university to try to allow this sort of learning, encourage people attracted by this way of thinking to learn like that. So this is my last slide, and this is a very fledgling prototype, what we call beta in the tech world. We're trying to get people to think of their learning as a network. And there's a little animated GIF. And I don't know if you can see that, but you might start with some storytelling and connect it to systems thinking. And then that might become some archive research connected to photography and videography. And you can see all the different things. That's a pretty complex network, to be honest. Yours may not be that complicated. And then you could pan in and you could have this on LinkedIn. This would literally be your transcript. Anyone could see it straight away and say, wow, this is a systems thinker with expertise in storytelling, connecting anthropology, sociology, economics, and so on. It's a prototype, so we haven't filled in all the blobs and so on, but you can start to think how you might connect things you're really interested in and how those things might have a bearing on the real world in solving really interesting problems in the way I described for several of my students. So I'm not sure exactly of my time there, Greg, but I hope that's just about right. And I'll stop now if that's okay and hand back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Carl. That was amazing. I have a few questions, quite a few questions here. I've got some questions about the course, but I'll start with a question I have from Andrew. If you wanted to, let me. Oh, no. Hi, Andrew. You had a question, so yeah, just handing over to you now.
Hi, Professor Gombrich, thank you so much for your time and for such an inspiring and enjoyable talk. Sorry, I've got a spaniel in the background who's moaning. As a fellow mathematician, you'll be aware that many of us don't or indeed can't make jokes. And my favorite is probably, did you hear about the extroverted mathematician? He was one who stares at other people's feet when talking to them. And if for no other reason, I think it's absolutely marvelous that maths degrees, for instance, could become more broad-based. Do you think you'll face a difficult path, though, when you try to convince those who feel that subjects such as mathematics need to be 100% focused on that single discipline? And I really do hope not. And also, how diverse do you think that you can actually be with relation to, say, mathematics?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, Andrew. Thank you for the question, because my background's in maths and physics too. When I started the course at UCL, I was really anxious about this because we made a promise to offer the whole suite of modules across UCL. We had modules from 63 faculties, and our students took 2,000 or so modules between them, from absolutely hard pure mathematics, analysis, algebra and so on, right through all the sciences to the softest humanities. And I was really anxious that I was leading students down a path which would be very difficult for them and they might not recover from them and so on. And it simply never happened. Now, there is an element of, and let me give you one example which happened not once, not twice, but 3 times, not in mathematics, but in chemistry, which I actually don't know much about, but it's hard science. We had on 3 occasions in the 5 years I was there for graduation, I was on that course for nearly 9 years, we had the top student in organic chemistry in UCL, better than all the single honors chemists, was from my liberal arts and sciences background. And these students had done also anthropology and Arabic and accounting and all sorts of other things. So that was astonishing to me. And one of them got offered to go straight onto a PhD in chemistry, despite having done really only something like a 1/6 to 1/4 of her degree was in organic chemistry. But it's also instructive because, as you probably know, chemistry divides into 3 parts. organic, inorganic, and physical. And it turned out you were able to do organic chemistry, sort of a third of a chemistry degree, really well, and do a ton of other things. And we found the same thing happened in mathematics. But we couldn't ever pretend to turn out people who'd be brilliant all-round mathematicians. But we could turn out people who are very strong in mathematical methods, so much so that one went on to a PhD in theoretical physics. We could turn out people who did enough pure mathematics to kind of understand the basis of it. So three courses in analysis, say, and 3 courses in algebra, but that's 6 modules out of 24 of a 3-year degree. And so we found ways through the degree which were very rigorous and suited to what the students wanted, but were just different to single honors mathematics. And of course, as you'll know as a mathematician, particularly things like statistics and now data science can service so many other, have to service in a way, so many other disciplines that many students did, say, 2 or 3 courses in things like coding and data science or coding and stats, and then would apply that to neuroscience, economics, whatever it might be. So absolutely there are ways through. Maths is probably the hardest case of all, and physics, and you have to be cautious. You can't let students just jump around and do everything because otherwise they won't progress. But you can find meaningful tracks through all these so-called hard disciplines, which are of immense value to the student and get them to understand the subject both from the inside and be able to apply it in other areas. So, that whole experience completely changed my outlook on what's possible. And I just think we have to take it from there and see where we go next.
I think you're absolutely right. I love opera, for instance, but I just wish that mathematicians did have the opportunity to be more broad-based. And I think this is really quite an exciting venture, and I wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, some really great questions coming in, and do feel free to kind of jump on just like Andrew did and ask your question live, but we've got some really great questions in the chat here. So Angela asked, will lecturers, so at LIS, will lecturers on the course such modules and classes be working full-time at the university, or are there also visiting lecturers from university around the globe /UK? And just wondering, I guess that's 2 questions. And the second question is, how will you cover the breadth of interests of the whole student cohort? It's a really good question.
They are both great questions. The first one's a bit easier. Yes, we have a dedicated faculty. We are small, which is immensely challenging, which is part of the second question, actually. But all our staff are immensely interdisciplinary, very exciting because of it. So typically, they'll have a first degree in humanities, a master's in kind of social sciences with a quantitative development, and then a PhD in something pretty quantitative, all the other way around. So I had a fun time at the beginning. We had a spreadsheet. We said, which disciplines would you be confident to teach at university? And the kind of minimum number anyone put was about 4 or 5. So it's pretty amazing. And yes, they're full-time. Sorry, what was the name of the questioner, Louise? Angela? Andrea?
Angela.
Angela, yes, Angela. Yeah, so very broadly, yes, everyone is full-time. I mean, you have to be kind of really dedicated to build this thing. It's a startup, so it has the energy of a startup, but also the requirements of a startup. You've got to be really engaged. Not every single member of faculty be full-time. We have a very brilliant, very young member of faculty who actually we've given a bit of a head start because we think he's got a very, very bright future, but he's going to be actually doing a PhD at the same time. But he could have sort of got a job anywhere, really doing anything. And we've got another member of faculty who actually has his own business in the kind of data science space. So that's exciting because he's going to keep fertilizing our curriculum with the real things he's doing. So both those guys are exactly half-time. But we try and keep the contracts pretty clean. So it's either full-time or half-time. With regard to externals, yes, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of a staple of universities, that you get in experts to speak on specific topics that you want them to. And again, at LIS, I like the kind of breadth of partners that we have. We have lots of partners in sort of social entrepreneurship, big business, government, and so on, with real expertise, and they'll be coming onto the curriculum to talk about these real world problems and how they see them as important, and then how we'll be thinking about how we weave that into the curriculum. So it will be a mix of full-time faculty, a few, not nearly so many part-time, and external experts. The breadth is a really good question, and this is tricky for me as someone leading the whole thing. We can't do everything about everything. I think I sort of woke up one morning with a kind of speech about it in my head. One of the almost like it's the hope and the danger of these sorts of degrees is they are incredibly exciting, genuinely, and you genuinely go on an intellectual and emotional journey in your learning. But nothing can give you everything about everything. It's simply impossible. But it's not about that. It's about connecting the bits you find really interesting, create something which holistically makes sense to you and has value in the world. But that also means that we won't almost try to offer everything because it's kind of impossible when you're really small. So then the question is, what do we leave out? And that is a really, really big question at the moment. So let me be totally upfront. At the moment, we won't have lab-based chemistry. So we won't have what's sometimes called wet science in the chemistry area. We are doing biology, and we are doing things like psychology with lab components, but there'll be more sort of data collection and analysis of data, which is the way a lot of science is going now. Many scientists you speak to will say we have more data than we will ever know what to do within 50 years, and the science is about analyzing, not collecting more data. So that's the call we're making at the moment. And similarly, we won't have really hardcore physics. We'll rather take a data science and mathematics approach to physics. So give you the tools to sort of do the physics you want, but we wouldn't go through the traditional physics routes. Apart from that, we're very, very strong across all the sciences, mathematics, social sciences, and humanities, and we've got a fantastic head of art. We're very excited by what fine art and creative thinking and art practice can do in this exciting new world, in new ways of seeing things. So that person will be working with our scientists on all sorts of interesting interdisciplinary areas. But I think if you're really interested in LIS, ask us a specific question about a subject. I can quickly tell you, yeah, we've got expertise in that, or no, we haven't. And I think that's probably the most honest way to try and do it. We'll be a small faculty when we start. So we'll have about 10 to 12 faculty members covering an average of about 4 disciplines each. That gives you a lot, but it won't give you everything. So we need to know exactly what you're interested in.
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you for that. Yeah, but ultimately it'll be a great ratio, because having that sort of 10 to 1, because there will only be 100 students, so there'll be a lot of that's just brilliant in itself. But yeah, so we have another great question saying, is the idea of a new university similar to colleges in the USA where students study a broad range of subjects before specializing for postgrad? So kind of talking about the liberal arts system versus interdisciplinarity, which yeah.
Thanks, Louise. Yeah, yes, a bit. I mean, I think you should be aware anyone who claims a revolution in education, including me, we go slowly in education. We as people don't change very much. So I think thinking about this network of knowledge in your head is sort of a revolution. I'm surprised that no one's really done it properly. So it's exciting to do, but of course it's related to many things that have gone before, one of which is liberal arts or liberal arts and sciences, as I think it should be called. But I think you should always do some science at university, no matter what your background. And you'll read in most of the blurbs about liberal arts courses that they do talk about interdisciplinarity, something important. What I think we're doing at LIS, and which I started at the UCL, is really trying to make that a bit more explicit connections, which Louise mentioned a bit at the beginning. Why do economists think that rational behavior looks like this, whereas some psychologists will say rational behavior is the exact opposite of that? Why have they come to those different conclusions? And so in comparing and contrasting different disciplinary approaches to things, what they think counts as evidence or what they think counts as something that's true or false, that you kind of get more than the sum of the parts of the learning, and that kind of highlighting of deliberate interdisciplinarity, deliberate connection and contrast, if you like, between disciplines, is not always done to a massive extent at liberal arts sciences colleges. Good ones should do it, and most do a bit. But I think that's something we really want to get exciting and constantly kind of generating new ideas at LIS.
Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, there's some other questions about, you kind of spoke to this a little bit, but I'm going to get up a bit of a sort of slide because I think it helps to have a visual representation, because I've had a few questions about the course itself and just kind of the structure of it, and we can both kind of speak to that. But we had a question asking, can you take the degree to a higher level, such as a master's?
I mean, we're not doing a master's just yet. I showed the slide about my students doing PhDs from BASC. I mean, every single master's every single type of masters that my BSc students from UCL applied to, they got into. I was going to say every single masters, but of course they didn't all get into MIT to do the very masters they wanted. But if they wanted to do, say, evolutionary biology at MIT and they didn't get in there, they'd get in somewhere else like Oxford or the Max Planck Institute or whatever it might be. So you can go on to an enormous range of masters after these types of degrees, providing you've got a decent foundation in whatever it is you want to do next. We also have medicine students from UCL, by the way, going on to medicine after our degree. So yeah, Louise has got up a slide there about the curriculum. I can tell you a little bit more about that. But it's a bit like the work argument with regard to study progression. There's just nothing to worry about. I mean, obviously, if you do on your liberal arts program, you kind of shy away from all the sciences and then suddenly decide you want to do a master's in electronic engineering. You know, that's going to be a bit daft. That's not going to work. But if you do enough maths and some physics courses on your liberal arts courses, and then you want to do masters in engineering, that is possible. And so, yeah, the range of masters that are open, and again, partly because a lot of masters are interdisciplinary because they have to be a bit closer to what the real world requires, postgraduates, than undergrad or schoolwork does. You just won't have a problem going from these types of degrees, whether at LIS or another institution, on most master's courses. So yeah, do you want me to quickly just explain the curriculum, Louise? Would that help some of the questions?
Yeah, that would be brilliant. Just a few questions about the course. I thought just
really simple structure, which I hope helps because in some ways it's very, very radical. We just have problems and methods. That's it. And we look at real world problems, sort of things I mentioned, and we look at methods with which to tackle those problems. So the problems are basically 40% of each year, and the methods are 60%. That's solid years 1 and 2, and it changes slightly in the 3rd year when you have your own project and so on. But for example, we might look at happiness or unhappiness as a metric in society and think about how we might measure that and what the point of measuring unhappiness might be. So you might want to take a data science perspective of that. You might get some data around the use of antidepressants or people registering for counseling and start to look at what age groups those people are, if they have any other underlying issues, what parts of the country they're from, and so on. Or you might take a standard, more psychological approach, which seems more obvious, to record people's feelings of unhappiness and think about why that might be. You might take a more biological, neurological approach and talk about chemicals, serotonin, neurotransmitters, and so on. You might take an anthropological approach and look at, you know, culture and happiness. Are there some cultures that don't talk about happiness in the same way as we do and therefore measure it very differently? So what you think counts as unhappiness determines how you measure it. And then that determines a whole bunch of things, such as funding for counseling and funding for programs that are meant to alleviate unhappiness. So there are all sorts of different methodological processes you can take and disciplinary processes you can take to look at these different problems. And we are working very hard with partners and with students who come to our open days and so on to think about sorts of problems that are interest to you as students. So I mentioned sustainability, artificial intelligence and ethics, education, in fact, is another problem. And then we refine the kind of problem statement. What does it want to tackle? And then we look at all these different lenses from either disciplinary perspectives or methods perspectives to tackle or approach that problem. So that's basically the curriculum. Of course, there's a lot of variety, an enormous amount of variety in that. But the sort of top level, if you like, is a very clear picture. And the variety comes in all the different perspectives you take on these problems. And then in the year 2, you'll have a bit more chance to kind of go one way or the other. So we're always going to insist that students do some science and some arts in some combination. But if you're really arty, but still see, I really do need another course in data science because this is so important, you can do that, but you can concentrate more on the arts, on humanities, social sciences, or the other way around. So the problems will continue, but your methods, you can start to skew them more towards one or the other, depending on your kind of interests or skills.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And I guess the world of work part, just kind of the idea is that ultimately you'll be learning really practical skills that are valuable within the workplace, which I think Carl's kind of spoken about. So we have another question, a really great question there. Hi, Hattie. Hattie asks, she says, as a classicist, she always has sort of thought about interdisciplinarity, and she wanted to know whether more should be done during secondary education in order to introduce, you know, interdisciplinarity earlier on. And do you think that, you know, we are too narrow by the time we're leaving school?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Hattie, and I don't really want to tread on teachers' patch too much. I think school teachers are you know, one of the most underrated and under-respected areas of society. I hope that's not the case at King's. I'm sure you are highly respected, but generally I don't think we support teachers enough and value the career enough. So I don't want to, and I'm a university guy, so I don't want to sort of impinge and tell them what to do. I'll tell you what I really think, and then whether you might push back on part of it. I think when you're really young, interdisciplinarity is kind of a no-brainer. No kid wants to be told, this is this subject, this is this subject. They love just learning and putting things together. It might be about penguins, right? But penguins could be in geography or biology or an art or whatever it might be. So I see kind of interdisciplinarity is totally natural when you're young. Up to what age, I don't know, but let's say kind of year 7, right? Then I definitely see at my level as kind of essential now to get the type of mindset and the skills, breadth, and as Louise was just saying, they're just kind of general broad skills that are essential for the vast majority of modern 9 out of 10 jobs. But there is a piece in the middle, which actually might be more relevant to your world, where I can see the value actually being a bit more constrained. You start maybe for a while at secondary school and come out wide again. Maybe not. I don't know. I think my internet's unstable there. I hope you can still hear me. So that's the kind of bit I would like to discuss with teachers. You know, adolescence is a fascinating time for development. We know a bit more about it now. The brain is literally a different brain to when you're a baby or when you're an adult. I might be cutting out, but I'll keep going. So there may be a case for secondary school being a bit more tightly constrained in order to help adolescents order their own thinking, because interdisciplinarity needs careful, can get to be a bit of a soup unless you have these careful nodes connecting them in meaningful, thoughtful, rigorous ways. So I'm not, you know, totally mad, progressive, proselytize, I'll smash it all down, let everyone do everything, every student should do whatever they want. You've got to organize your learning to get kind of progression and rigor at some point. And it could be that the secondary schools, that's the place to do it. I'm open to that. Having said that, I do really like the IB. I think it's a fantastic qualification and they have a lot of interdisciplinarity built into the core there. So, but it's expensive. So, you know, it probably could be done better than it is, but I think, yeah, I think it's a discussion we should continue to have, basically.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So we've got a question here, a really good question, actually. How do you assess a course like the one that we're offering at LIS? It's a really good question.
It is a great question because we really want novel, innovative, creative insights. We want our students to be, however small, doing something that is new and helps us understand. I mean, solving a problem isn't going to happen when you're 19, well, it could happen, of course it could, but it's unlikely you're going to solve climate change at the age of 20, 21. But you might have a genuinely new little insight about a product or a way people are behaving or some kind of government contract and that no one's quite seen before. And we want that novelty. And the whole system at the moment for education is set up to hit targets, zero novelty. All there is to hit exactly the same target as everyone else, and then you get the full grade. You think how mad that is in a way. Again, it depends on the age and stage and so on. But if everyone comes out with exactly the same knowledge, what's the point of that knowledge? You've all got the same knowledge. You're not contributing anything which is really going to be meaningful or either personal to you or actually helpful to an external organization. So we have basically the answers. We do have rubrics. We have rubrics which look at disciplinary understanding. So it has to come from a place of knowledge of the disciplines. We have rubrics for how well you synthesize or contrasted the different disciplines. We have rubrics on self-reflection and sort of study journey and what you learned on the way. And we have a section on novelty and creativity, which allows for us to be surprised. And we will share this marking between a very expert, diverse team. And if somebody has done something really remarkable, they will get very, very good score for that if it's something that we hadn't thought of before. So there's a mixture, about 70, 75% what you'd expect to show learning and progression, but also some capacity for really innovative thinking and new ways of working.
Great, and I'm just going to answer the last two questions because so one question about cost, how much does it cost? It's £9,000 per year, just like other universities, which is great. Yeah, that was one of the exciting parts of having degree awarding powers. So when I registered, you're able to apply for student finance as well as tuition and maintenance, which is great. And then the question about accommodation. So yeah, in terms of accommodation, what we'll be doing is partnering with a accommodation providers. So you'll be able to live with other students at LIS, but you'll also be able to, live with students who are also other students who are going to university in London. So that's always really great as well. So yeah, I think those were the last 2 questions that we have. I think we've covered everything, and I'm just going to throw up one more slide in the spirit of Zoom. Ian, I'm just going to throw up one more, just with a QR code. If you'd like to stay in touch, and it'd be great to have some of your emails, and if you had any further questions that we weren't able to answer today, I'm just going to throw it up
Likewise,
and hand over to Greg.
In this meeting, I'm happy to take any particular student inquiries. I may pass you on to Louise or other members of the team, or if it's something more about interdisciplinarity and something technical about the degree, I'm very happy to answer that as well.
Perfect, that's great. We can tag team on that. So, brilliant. Right, Greg, I'm going to hand over to you, I think.
Look, thank you so much, Louise. Thank you so much, Professor Carr. That was absolutely fascinating. The whole concept of interdisciplinarity is just so logical. I think back to my university degree, and actually, whilst a lot of it is relevant, you do learn the vast majority on the job. And that would be the same for every teacher, and for not only teaching, but also, I did an engineering degree, and there was a lot of logical stuff there. But in the end, all my friends learned so much when they were on the job that really was just, I suppose, the degree was there to tell you, how to learn. You learn how to learn by doing a degree, and the interdisciplinarity concept very much facilitates and promotes that idea and your problem-solving abilities. So, Carl, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your wisdom.
Thank you.
Honesty.
Thanks for setting this up, Greg. And
sharing your knowledge. It was thought-provoking and inspiring. And Louise, thank you also for coming back to King's, even in this virtual world. And you're treading a very exciting and fantastic path. Our thoughts are with you, with your wonderful journey you're about to go on with this LIS, and you brought it home tonight, and very best of luck with your career. And both Carl and Louise, please keep in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks, everyone.
And just to finish off, I'll just let you know that our next King's Talk is next Wednesday, the 2nd of December. And we welcome back Ashitha Nagesh. She is OKS, Mitchelton's from 2008. She is now an award-winning BBC News journalist, and title of her talk is Undeserved and Unheard, the Art of Telling Other People's Stories. So once again, thank you, Carl, thank you, Louise, and I hope to see you next Wednesday night, and a very good night to you.